So another important concept that we want to talk about as a compositor looking at a shot is impressions versus reality, right? So the further something away from the camera is, we can sort of compress whatever that thing is into a simplified form. And this is kind of how like painters think about things as well. When you're painting, a forest, they're not painting every single individual leaf with every single individual vein on each leaf, for example. They're just using one dot of color with maybe a specular highlight that's slightly desaturated. And that's kind of the same concept. It's like you're taking something complex, you're simplifying it for the distance that we're looking at it. So that's kind of the impression on the viewer versus the reality of what it actually is. And so this is happening a lot even in this shot. So for example, if we just think about this for a moment, this is one way to look at it. So we have like the city here. So this is a perfect example. Like we could make an entire city from a noise pattern. We could just take a noise pattern, we could make some areas brighter, we can make some areas darker, and then just break up the colors, and we get the impression that there's a city down here, but actually it's just a noise pattern. In this example, we didn't use a noise pattern. I actually use a picture that I've taken over Los Angeles, and I'll give you guys that picture to do the matte painting with, and there's a whole bunch of pictures we're going to use here. But we're still getting that sort of feeling, and I just wanted to show you because you could do it with a noise pattern and probably get a very similar result. You might have to spend a little bit more time getting the little clusters. So you see like there's kind of a cluster here, and there's a little bit more density in certain areas. So if you study cities and the layout of a city, you're going to see these kind of clusters, and then you're going to see these roads that are maybe a little bit more dispersed. But everything is going to be connected, right? So there's going to be roads that need to connect to transport materials or whatever it is. So when you're designing something, you want to design it. You don't just want to put a random noise pattern. If you're doing like the look dev or something, you want to think about the purpose of the thing you're designing. What is the story behind it? What is the reason that things exist? And it's the same for all of this here. All of this stuff has a purpose. I'm thinking about the story about what this place might be. Maybe this is an underground mining facility. That's how I was thinking about it. So I was like, well, maybe they're transporting some kind of oil or some kind of materials down into this maybe underground facility. So in my mind, I was coming up with a story and then designing around that story after I had kind of determined what I wanted to do. But continuing with the impression versus reality, we can see the same thing up here, right? So we have these like meteors, all these little floating rocks, but we also see ones that are much smaller. So we see like ones that are kind of like really tiny dots, and we're just using some noise patterns in there, very dispersed, but it still gives us the impression that those are actual rocks. And so we have some CG rocks to start with, so some of these are actual CG, but we want to still give the impression that this asteroid field continues much further. And again, so we're just simplifying. We're just saying, well, maybe some of the ones that are really far away will catch highlights. So you'll see that some are brighter and then some are darker. You'll see that some have a little bit less highlight. So based on the rotation of that rock or how it's catching the reflection, we need to break up the highlights. We don't want them all to be one. You wouldn't want to simply just put white dots everywhere, because it's not going to give you the impression that some are more reflective, some are more of a flat surface. A flat surface is going to reflect more the highlight that's casting onto it versus like a more broken up rock. So to give that impression, we're breaking up the highlights. We're having some brighter and some darker. And same with all of this stuff, right? So we have like all of this cloud stuff, which is giving us the impression that it's pushing through dirt, and we're also leaving like a hole in the cloud. So this ship is so big that it's actually it's kind of making it darker behind. So it's actually pushing all the light dust kind of in front of it and leaving that darker area. And so those are all little things we want to think about. Same with all of this kind of stuff. We have all this impression of these giant boulders and all this kind of stuff up here, but these are through the matte painting and stuff like that, so it doesn't really go with this concept completely, but just things to look at and think about. So always think about how can I compress things down based on the distance. And this doesn't only apply to patterns like noise patterns. It also applies to like motion, so you could kind of get the feeling that this dust cloud is moving. We could even take a picture of a dust cloud. And one trick you can do with to give the impression of motion or the impression of moving clouds is to key the highlights. So you can key like the brightest bits. You see like there's a brighter spot here. You could key that spot and then make that spot like animate a little bit faster than the rest of the cloud around it. And what that will do is actually give you the impression of parallax. So even though it's not true parallax, the length of the shot is only from 1 to 230. So we only have maybe like a couple seconds here. The shot's not like 10 minutes long. So by the time that effect would break, it wouldn't work anymore. It still gives us the impression. So that's how we can like fake a parallax, fake 3D without truly doing the whole 3D process. So the more ways we can sort of give impressions, the better. This is the same also for this missile. So this is an impression thing. I didn't actually simulate any effect for this missile. And why would I? Because look at the sizes on the screen. We're not going to simulate, a super highly detailed, fire coming off of this. This is just a couple grades, some basic noise, and some clouds that it's going through. So we'll talk about that once we get into how it's made and everything like that. But you also see there's a slight trail of smoke. And again, that's just some noise patterns and some rotos. And we're using it on some 3D geometry as well. But we'll talk about all of that. But again, even the windows up here. So this ship didn't actually have windows. Do we need to model an interior for the ship? Absolutely not. We don't need to waste time doing that. We can just take a picture of a city and just put some simple windows in there and give the impression that this thing has all of this like detail there. So those are all the kind of things you want to think about. And same for this, we're giving the kind of impression of like lightning bolts, but we're not simulating it. We're actually using a pattern. So I'm going to show you guys how we did that. So it's just about simplifying, getting the feeling of things, and that's about it. So we'll talk about some different concepts next.